call the member for Kooyong.
Thank you, Mr Acting Deputy Speaker. I rise to speak on the Australian Citizenship Amendment Defence Families Bill 2012, and doing so support many of my colleagues in this House, most recently the member for Bennelong. This bill will amend the Australian Citizenship Act 2007 to fast-track citizenship for family members of defence personnel who are lateral recruits to the Australian Defence Force. As the law currently stands, a member of the Australian Defence Force and their children under the age of 16 years can apply for citizenship after that member has completed 90 days of service in the permanent forces or 6 months in the reserves, whereas family members who don't fall within this category, including children who are over the age of 16 years, have to wait for at least 4 years before applying for citizenship. They can get permanent residency, but not citizenship. However, under these changes being proposed in this legislation, spouses and dependents will be deemed eligible to apply for citizenship after 90 days of the ADF member's service, which could be equivalent of 90 days of paid service in the reserves, not the 180-day requirement as currently stands. Mr Acting Deputy Speaker, there is a strong rationale for this bill. The Australian Defence Force already recruits up to about 300 defence personnel from abroad, coming from a range of countries, but including New Zealand, the United Kingdom, South Africa and the United States. Often these recruits come to Australia with their support of their original country. Importantly, 90% of these lateral recruits have families and bring them with them. And in doing so, these lateral recruits fill important credibility gaps in our service. We are providing them with a job in our first-class Australian Defence Force, and in return, Australia gets a skilled and highly trained military person who adds to our country's Defence Force's professionalism and skill set. It is in reality a win-win for both sides. Mr Acting Deputy Speaker, this legislative change before the House tonight enhances the Australian Defence Force's ability to recruit the best on offer. It also recognises that we support not just the ADF personnel themselves, but their families, the ones who provide the support, who live with the hardships while their Defence Force members are away, and whose sacrifice is not necessarily with their lives, but often with their livelihoods, which are interrupted significantly by long periods away. Be under no illusions, Mr Acting Deputy Speaker. We need these lateral recruits. If one goes to the Army's online recruitment centre, as I did prior to coming into this House, there is a section for overseas applicants where it lists the positions that the Australian Defence Force is looking for officers and soldiers. Applications, ironically, close on the 15th of June this year, which is just gone. But there is a long list of positions that the Australian Defence Force is seeking commissioned officers for. It includes in aviation, rotary wing pilots, in artillery, officers with surveillance and target acquisition and offensive support specialisation, dental, specialised officers who are qualified dentists, nursing corps, qualified nurses, engineers, aeronautical, electrical and mechanical, intelligence corps, qualified intelligence corps officers, transport, officers with amphibious experience in particular, ordnance, logistics officers, military police, qualified military police officers, signals, officers with electronic warfare or cyber warfare experience. And the list goes on, Mr. Acting Deputy Speaker. This shows the capability gaps which we need filled. This legislation cannot wait, as the opportunities to recruit these laterals and take advantage, for example, of what is happening in the United Kingdom with their significant reduction in military personnel numbers is right now. In fact, if we act now and lift the incentives for the best and the brightest from overseas to come to our Defence Forces, we stand best positioned to meet some of these strategic challenges ahead. Mr. Acting Deputy Speaker, I remember on my trip to Afghanistan last year to meet with the more than 1,500 men and women of the Australian Defence Force who are serving our country so bravely in that difficult war zone. I heard from both Australian soldiers as well as some British troops about the significant changes taking place in the UK military scene, where tough economic conditions have led to a reassessment by government there of its priorities, and the fact that a number of senior military personnel in the United Kingdom were going to be without a job. It's also important, Mr. Acting Deputy Speaker, to note that for every one of these lateral recruits that Australia does attract, we do save some of the financial expense that would have otherwise been incurred in training that person up. For example, a fully trained pilot will cost the taxpayer between $1.5 to $2 million. So should you be able to recruit somebody with that skill set, you are saving the taxpayer an equivalent amount. Can I say one of the other important flow-on effects from this legislation, Mr. Acting Deputy Speaker, is that it helps mitigate the likelihood of where, in a terrible event, an ADF member is killed, that the dependents are unable to stay in Australia or access benefits because they are not citizens. Benefits that may otherwise be payable to an Australian spouse. Now we have lateral recruits who are serving in ADF combat operations in Afghanistan. It is for personnel like these whose spouses and family members will get real benefit from this legislation, because fast-tracking citizenship for them could mean that they're also going to be able to access benefits that may otherwise not be the case. Finally, Mr. Acting Deputy Speaker, I want to say that this legislation introduced by the government is virtually identical to that which was introduced by my friend and colleague, the Coalition Shadow Minister, the member for Fadden. He took the initiative when the government didn't. He got the support of Defence Families of Australia. He advocated for change because he was in touch with the needs of defence, Australian defence personnel and their families. His bill was introduced first and the government shamelessly followed. I do welcome the government's bill before the House tonight, but I acknowledge that it took them a long time to change heart. In fact, the Minister for Immigration and Citizenship, Chris Bowen, in a letter dated the 4th of February 2011, specifically rebuffed the Minister for Defence Personnel, Warren Snowden, on this point when he'd said, "I do not consider it necessary to amend the citizenship legislation." Well, Mr. Acting Deputy Speaker, now we have the government backflipping yet again, and don't we get used to it. However, this time, fortunately, it's in pursuit of a good cause, and I support the bill before the House. But I acknowledge that it's the member for Fadden and our shadow minister in this portfolio who took the initiative, who led the charge and he shined a light on this government's deficiencies. And it's because of his effort that the government has followed with its own bill. And it's because of his effort that we are now seeing a change for the better for the defence families of Australia who deserve our support. Finally, Mr. Acting Deputy Speaker, the world is unstable. We are seeing the economic crisis in Europe. We are seeing a United States in an election year galvanised by $14 trillion of debt. We are seeing a rising China, a rising India, and we are seeing tensions in our own region in the South China Sea, which is leading to some countries like Vietnam, like the Philippines, like the Singaporeans and others balancing against what they see as an increased power play by China. In fact, for Australia ourselves, we've seen the troops, the US Marines, going to rotate through Darwin and perhaps elsewhere. All significant changes, but all reflecting the instability of our region. And during this period of instability, there is no more important Australian institution than our Defence Force. The men and women of our Australian Defence Force are our last line of defence. They uphold our values and help ensure that the world and our region is a better place. That's the role played for more than a century by our Australian Defence Force. That's why, Mr. Acting Deputy Speaker, it's been unconscionable that so much of the defence budget has been ripped out by this government. According to ASPI, more than $20 billion in the last few years alone. It is not a laughing matter. It is not a laughing matter yes.
Member for Riverina.
It is not a laughing matter, as Sid Sidebottom is having us say.
Member for Kooyong will refer to members by their title or their election.
The member for Braddon, may I say? From Tasmania. Can I say that he should not be laughing at what is a very serious point here, which is actually this government's undermining of defence. And I just want to finish here because we are talking about a bill which will enhance Australia's strategic depth and ensure that we can continue to attract the best and brightest from overseas. That's what this bill is about. So I commend this bill, but I acknowledge that it's in the context of following the initiative of the member for Fadden, and it's in the context of this government ripping billions of dollars out of a crucial defence budget at a time when our region is unstable and where we are seeing heightened tensions. So, Mr. Acting Deputy Speaker, I do support this bill. I think that giving lateral recruits fast access to citizenship for their families and for their spouses and their dependents and for their children over the age of 16 is a very positive initiative. And with 300 plus lateral recruits coming to this country every year, filling absolutely critical positions, as I outlined, in aviation, in the nursing corps, in engineers, in the intelligence corps, in ordnance, in military police, in signals, and in artillery, and a lot more. These are critical areas. So by enhancing these lateral recruits' ability to access citizenship is a positive development. But I say to this government, don't play the politics of defence. Because in this climate, our Australian Defence Force deserve all the moral and financial support that this parliament can muster, and I pay tribute to the legacy of the Howard government in defence and to the efforts of my colleague, the member for Fadden, in taking the initiative on this bill.